Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Heather and today I'm going to walk you through all of the books that I read in August. It's hard to believe that here we are, beginning autumn. I know it doesn't begin officially until the 22nd, but September always feels like the start of autumn to me. But I had a fantastic reading month in August. First, I need to tell you about a few books of which I do not have physical copies to hold up. The first are a series of audiobooks that I have started listening to, which are the Rumple Audiobooks. I can't remember if I mentioned them in my Jane Austen July wrap-up or not. Obviously, they have nothing to do with Jane Austen, but I may have listened to one in July. And these are put out by BBC Audio because these were originally radio dramas that have been bound up into 3 or 4 stories at a time for you to listen to via Audible. They therefore star a full cast. The first 4 star Benedict Cumberbatch as Horus Rumple, and this follows Rumple in his younger days as he begins his career as a lawyer at the Old Bailey in London in the 50s, 60s? It's hard to tell exactly when they're set, but definitely somewhere within those 20 years. As the series goes on, I have learned Rumple begins to be played by different actors as Rumple ages. So the next set star Julian Rhind-Tutt as Rumple, another actor whose name escapes me at the moment, and ending, I believe, with Sir Timothy West playing Rumple in his old age. Rumple has a very funny style to him, which I think is the reason why I enjoy listening to these so much, and why my parents have enjoyed the novels and the television show for years now. The first couple I thought were very good. I must say that The Sleeping Partners, which is the third in this particular series, is my least favorite. I did not enjoy what they did with Horus and his wife Hilda's relationship. Hilda, otherwise known as She Who Must Be Obeyed, sometimes She Who Must for short. So I'm really hoping that this next set with Julian Rhind-Tutt will leave that particular plotline in the dust and we can carry on with, frankly, a much nicer Rumple. But they have been a delight to listen to, especially because each episode is its own insular story. Also this month, I read The Two Noble Kinsmen by William Shakespeare and John Fletcher, and I won't say a lot about that here, but you can go and watch my review of that play in the video that I will have linked over here, hopefully, or down below. So now to the physical books that I read in August. The first book that I finished was The Queen of Spades and Other Stories by Alexander Pushkin. This counted as my classic book for the month, and I have mixed feelings about it. The first story does not translate nicely. I can't figure out a way to make it translate nicely without making it wordy and unwieldy. This edition has called it the Negro of Peter the Great. It's sometimes called Peter the Great's Blackmore. Like I said, there aren't great ways to translate it, but nonetheless. That story is based on a true story, I believe. Peter the Great did adopt this young man from North Africa and raised him in court, gave him a great education, sent him off to Paris to continue his education, and that's where we meet up with him, is in Paris in his late teens-ish, maybe early 20s, and we see what Parisian high society makes of him and the terrible messes that he gets into. But because of that, he is then called home again. So he goes back to Russia and has to experience the various reactions that people have to him. That to me was the most interesting and the most impactful part of that short story. Some people, like Peter the Great, just treated him as a person, as indeed everyone should. But he was so open-minded that he couldn't see why anyone wouldn't be as open-minded as he is. And indeed, no one else in the court is able to feel that same way. Such that when Peter the Great decides it is time for this young man to be married, and I shall make that match, the noble families are less than pleased about that, with terrible outcomes for everyone involved. And through that much of the story, I was really enjoying it, but it ends on the strangest note, literally and figuratively, because music is involved. And I can't help but wonder, is there something going on in that scene, some sort of symbolism that I'm missing? If you have read this short story, let me know down below. The rest of the short stories, however, were fantastic. I really enjoyed them. I mainly bought it for The Queen of Spades, which is another Tchaikovsky opera, like Eugene Onegin, also by Pushkin. It was fantastic. I can't imagine how they stretched it out into a full opera, but I am very intrigued to go watch and listen to it now to find out. And indeed, he had 2 other short stories featuring highwaymen and revolutions and all sorts of epic drama, one of which was supposed to become a full novel. So it is in this collection because it remained unfinished after Pushkin died. So all we have are his notes of the 2 alternate endings that it could have had, which are fascinating. It's almost like a choose-your-own-adventure novel when you hit that point. So I will stop rambling, but overall I really enjoyed this set of stories. I also read The Professor and the Madman by Simon Winchester, which is, as it says on the cover, a tale of murder, insanity, and the making of the Oxford English Dictionary. And this has been turned into a film as well, which I did not realize until I started reading it. But it is about John Murray, who, as he was compiling entries to create the Oxford English Dictionary, received a lot of entries from Dr. W.C. Minor. Lots of quotations about particular words' usage that he was able to include. And they formed a great correspondence. However, he later discovered that Dr. Minor was in an insane asylum. And so this book tracks each of their lives, how John Murray came up with the idea of compiling the Oxford English Dictionary, how Dr. Minor came from America to England, what had happened to him in America before he came to England, and how he became imprisoned, and how his mental illness progressed once he was in the asylum as well. It was really interesting, and I'm very glad that you all suggested that I read this before the Dictionary of Lost Words, which I'll come to in a moment. There was something about it that didn't quite sit right with me, and I can't really put my finger on what that was. So I wouldn't say it was one of my favorite reads, but it was certainly very interesting to read, and I'm glad that I read it. Next, however, before I continued on with my Oxford English Dictionary theme, I picked up The Winter Sea by Susanna Kearsley. My friend Amanda sent this to me a few months ago because she had absolutely loved this book, this author, everything that she has written, and thought that I would really love it too. We were also bonding over our love of historical fiction and Outlander and all that sort of novels. I cannot tell you how much I loved this book. It's from the perspective of a young woman named Carrie, who is a successful author, who goes to coastal Scotland to do some research about the first Jacobite uprising. So that would have been around the year 1708-ish. And she's doing this research for a novel that she is trying to write. However, as she starts doing that research, she starts having very powerful inspiration, very powerful dreams that seem to fill in gaps in her research before she's even done that research yet. And she soon discovers that one of her ancestors was involved in that uprising, in the book that she is trying to write. And so she's wondering how much of this is fiction and how much of it is what they call ancestral memory. Meanwhile, she is trying to negotiate her own romance alongside that of her ancestor that she is writing about. This book was the most wonderful surprise. I expected it to be very cozy, very comforting, very atmospheric, fairly light in terms of literary style, but one that I would love. And I did absolutely love it for those reasons. I could see where much of the plot was going from very early on, and I'm not sure if that was because I have read so much historical fiction before or because it was a bit predictable. But that wasn't a negative thing for me. That made it more cozy, knowing where this was going to go and just enjoying the ride until we got to those points. However, it is quite a long book. And for the first 200 pages, I felt exactly as I just described. I read the other 250 pages in one night. It became that gripping, that exciting, and the big reveal in the last 10 or 20 pages or so actually made me gasp out loud. And I have not had a book make me do that in a very long time. So if that plot sounds at all interesting to you, or if you've been a bit intimidated by Outlander and you'd like something a little bit lighter in terms of maybe sexual content or the gore factor, I would definitely recommend this book instead. I then picked up The Dictionary of Lost Words by Pip Williams, and this was another amazing read. I had heard wonderful things about it from Marissa at Blatantly Bookish, and indeed my friend Kathy, so I was really intrigued to pick it up. It makes a wonderful pairing with The Professor and the Madman, because it is about the creation of the Oxford English Dictionary from the perspective of a young girl whose father works in the scriptorium, as they called it. And from a young age, she is exposed to all of these words and their different meanings and the importance of all of their meanings. And she begins to collect words that have very important meanings to her, but also in women's lives, and how a word can mean different things to someone purely through connotation. And so she begins to collect women's words, which are not making it into the OED. It was beautiful, it was moving, it was inspiring. It makes you love language and love and hate humanity all at the same time, because it covers such a great span of time as well. You get to see the transition from the Victorian era through World War I and beyond, and how all of these people's lives can be changed through words or the omission of words. I really can't say more than that, but this is such a special book. I would highly, highly recommend that you read it. Next, I read The Sealed Letter by Emma Donahue. This was another fantastic book. It's about Emily Faithfull, otherwise known as Fido, who runs into an old friend of hers, Helen Codrington. And at first she is quite pleased to have found Helen again. Helen's husband is in the army, so they have been traveling for a great deal of time. But you also begin to realize that Helen's marriage is not a happy one, and that Fido knows about this. But she discovers that Helen might possibly be having an affair as well to escape her marriage, and then come divorce proceedings. And Fido is drawn deeper and deeper into this relationship and into this divorce as it unfolds. This is based on a true story of a true Victorian divorce case, and indeed many of the characters included were real people, although Emma Donahue may have fictionalized some elements of their lives. This book is really gripping, really fascinating, and it's most fascinating in terms of seeing how manipulative people can be and how everyone both is manipulated and manipulates someone else to reach the final point. I hated everyone in this by the end of the novel. Actually, no, kind of by the middle of the novel. But was still fascinated by them and was desperate to see how this case is going to turn out. And just when you think you know how it's going, someone will come up with another idea to pull the case towards their side that you have never seen coming. It is utterly wonderful, and it has sealed my love of Emma Donahue's historical fiction, which is good because I still have 3 more of her historical fiction novels to read somewhere on my physical TBR. And finally, I finished this morning The House on Mango Street by Sandra Cisneros. This is very hard to describe. Is it a novel? Is it a novella? Is it long-form poetry? Is it short stories? No one can quite agree on what to call its format. However, no matter what its format, it is still about Esperanza Cordero, who is growing up in a Latino neighborhood in Chicago and is beginning to grasp the world's expectations of her based on who she is and her socioeconomic status and her gender, and that she's trying to fight all of that and to find a way out of it while not still being entirely sure of what it is that she's in to begin with, given that she's only about 13. I found some of the sections very moving. I found others well written, but rather nebulous, I suppose, because my childhood looked and felt nothing like this one. But I would imagine that if you had a similar kind of childhood, that you would identify much more strongly with those chapters. So I'm very glad that I have read it. I mainly read it because one of my colleagues in the Spanish department always teaches a unit where they read this book in Spanish with some of his higher level students. So I thought it behooved me to have read it so I would know what he was talking about when he gets to that point in the year. And indeed, I'm very glad to have read it because it is quite a seminal work in modern literature anyway. And like I said, I think some bits of it were beautifully written, but it didn't move me the way I hoped that it would. This means that today I am going to start Maritoft, or The Rabbit Queen, about a true story of a woman in 18th century England who claimed to have given birth to rabbits. And so this book takes the perspective of the 2 doctors/scientists who are assigned to examine Maritoft to figure out what on earth has actually happened. Was this physically possible? Was she lying? Why would she have created this story if she was? All of those sorts of questions. I can't tell you how I felt about it yet because I have just started it, so this will show up in my September wrap-up next month. So there you have it. Those are all of the books that I have read in August so far, -1. Let me know in the comments down below if you have any further questions about any of these books, or if you have more recommendations for me based on wonderful books that you have read this month. I always love hearing from you in the comments, but until next time, be safe, be well, and happy reading. Bye everyone.